Hello summoners and welcome to another ProGuides video. I'm Zyrene and today we'll be talking about 10 things in League of Legends that are almost overpowered. The items and champions in this video have some really good strong points, and with just one or two slight adjustments or buffs, could easily become S tier in their class. One thing I do want you guys to know about is that we're doing a giveaway. We've got Riot points, coaching, ProGuides points, ProGuides subscriptions, and more. All you have to do to participate is subscribe, join our Discord using the link in the description, and check out our giveaway tab. Now, let's start the video. We'll start things off with the newest addition to the champion roster, RELL. With RELL's kit bringing insane tankiness, ability to break shields, tons of crowd control, and even a heal, she seems like she'd be a pretty OP champion. And in some teamfights, she really does bring a lot to the table. But when you compare her to another engaged support like Leona, you realize that RELL is just a bit too niche. While RELL does offer a ton of crowd control to disrupt the enemy team once a fight is underway, she doesn't necessarily have the best tools to actually start the fights up. So, unless you have someone like Malphite or Hecarim leading the charge, it's hard to actually get into the fray in the first place. Compare this to Leona, who can throw her ultimate out up to 1,200 units away to look for a pick or engage a teamfight. Aside from her lack of reliable engage, RELL also severely lacks the damage that most other tanky supports have. Speaking from experience, I know a Nautilus or Leona can nearly solo me at level 3 when I'm playing ADC, but RELL feels like she does about half of their damage. From everything we've said so far, picking RELL sounds like a good way to tank your elo. And with it being the start of a brand new season, that's the opposite of what you want to do. Early season games have the biggest amount of MMR changes, so they're really crucial in making sure you aren't spending the rest of this season trying to catch up to where you ended in the last one. That's exactly why we're giving you a chance to get a ProGuides subscription at a discounted price from now until the 14th, so you can use everything we have to offer to give your season the best start possible. Anyways, back on topic. So what changes would really make RELL good? Well, for starters, if she's going to have the niche of only really being strong in teamfights, she should be able to provide more disruption. A lower cooldown on her W and E, or even a bigger radius on her ultimate would be a step in the right direction. But that still won't fix how weak her laning is. I think RELL needs some serious buffs to her Q, both the damage and healing portions of it, so she's able to contribute more to the laning phase. Let's just hope that Riot buffs her in a way that makes her a viable support, and not shift her power so much that she changes roles entirely to being a top laner or jungler. Next up, we have Ahri. Her dual mage assassin identity means that she has good wave clear, burst, and the mobility to make picks on out of position carries. Ahri has had plenty of metas where she's been a top tier pick, but right now, she's pretty average, mainly because of her insanely long ultimate cooldown. At rank 1, you have to wait 130 seconds before you can use it again. When your champion is basically 100% reliant on their ultimate to have kill pressure, you can't really have over 2 minutes of downtime between making plays. The buff we're looking for on Ahri is a simple one. Lower her ultimate's cooldown by 20 or 30 seconds at rank 1, with less of a reduction at later ranks. A fair trade-off would be taking a bit of power out of one of her abilities, maybe her W, since it gives her guaranteed damage. Ahri synergizes super well with the new items, and has a really strong power spike with Ludens and Horizon Focus, so letting Ahri players actually play the game more frequently would definitely put her in our S tier. Aurelion Sol is another mid laner that's just on the cusp of being OP. His unique playstyle makes him a real curveball for mid and bot laners that aren't used to playing against the constant roaming and shoving that he does. He supergizes super well with the new items Imperial Mandate and Demonic Embrace, and once you fully master him, you can definitely carry some games by being almost a second jungler. So, with a heavy roaming champion, you generally expect their win rate to be high early and lower as the game goes on. Something like Qiyana in the early days of Season 10. But what's really interesting about Aurelion Sol is that's not necessarily the case. His win rate at 15 minutes is decently high, at around 52%, but it dips down to under 50% in games that end between 20 and 25 minutes, and then it skyrockets over 57% in games that go past that point. What this tells us is that Aurelion Sol is actually weaker in the early game, relying on the enemy mid laner being a weaker laner, so he can take advantage of their lack of pressure and win through roaming. If he can't successfully do this, he hits a power trough in the early mid game, but if he makes it past that, he really comes online around the later stages of the game. So in order for the Starforger to rise to the top, we'd need to see some early game consistency. Something as simple as more damage on his passive or his W's active for better lane control, and more sustained DPS would go a long way to helping with that. Off-meta picks and rare champions in general can easily catch an enemy off guard if they aren't used to dealing with them. It's why champions like Yorick and Aurelion Sol usually have pretty high win rates. And that brings us to our question of the day. What pick do you not see too often, but when you do, it seems like it never loses? Mine is Soraka mid lane. For some reason, no one knows how to shut her down, and since she's farming, she has the AP items to heal allies to full with a single W. Let us know your answers in the comments below. Moving on to our next pick, we have a champion that most of us probably hate to see in the meta, Vladimir. For a pretty big portion of the last few seasons, Vlad has been a dominant pick, especially in high elo. Even with a bad matchup, if you conceded pressure, took the farm you could safely get, and avoided dying, you would pretty much always scale up, hitting a massive power spike at 3 items, and could start one-shotting half of the enemy team with your opening combo. Going into preseason, we thought Vladimir would be really OP with all the new items. Options like Night Harvester, Rocket Belt, and Cosmic Drive seem like they'd be insane on him. And with Vlad being such a strong user of cooldown reduction, we assumed the new ability haste system would treat him well. So why didn't Vladimir burst into the preseason as well as we thought he would? This is a bit of a two-part answer. For one, damage is pretty high with all of the new items. Even tanks can burst you down, but even with the high damage coming his way, Vlad has usually been able to fight through it with his obscene healing. But that's the second part of our answer. Grievous Wounds is now easily accessible to every champion in the game, and since you can upgrade it to apply it at 60% effectiveness, Vlad can't quite heal up after being burst down in those early to mid fights. If Vladimir had a stronger early game and was able to match or just keep close to the pace of other champions, this wouldn't be as much of a problem. But at the moment, you'll almost always be playing from an item deficit until the mid to later stages of the game. So far, damage has been brought down a pretty decent amount from the start of preseason, and Vladimir's win rate has slowly been creeping up. But to see him become a truly overpowered pick again, he needs some buffs to his early game. A lower cooldown on his Q, and maybe even his W would give him a smoother and more survivable laning phase. And if that happens, I'll be banning him in 100% of my games. Vlad is one of those picks like Jax, Kassadin, and Yi that puts the enemy team on a timer. If they don't win before you hit a certain power spike, your odds of winning go massively up. So while he's very middle of the pack in general, if you can make it to the late game, you'll win the vast majority of your games. If you'd like to learn to constantly do that, head over to ProGuides.com, where our top tier coaches can teach you how to play scaling champions like a challenger. Since early season 9, every time GNAR has been in the patch notes, it's been a buff. He's just been consistently a weak pick. But due to his potential to become both a huge lane bully and teamfighting monster when he's overbuffed, Riot has erred on the side of caution, keeping the buffs small in scale. But they just couldn't let the adorable Yordle sit at the bottom of the pack forever. So on 11.1, they rolled out some huge buffs that did a lot to bring GNAR up in power. The increased jump range and a better slow means he has sticking power in Mega form, and the buff to his mini hop gives him better chances at dueling when he's tiny. And now, GNAR's power is right on the breaking point. One thing I think Riot should avoid is buffing his mini form's Q, since that just makes him more frustrating to deal with. Some healthier ideas would be more damage on his mini W proc, a lower cooldown on his hop, or increased stats in Mega form. There isn't really a single particular weakness that GNAR has at the moment, but buffs in any department could push him into the OP pick or ban list. On the topic of top laners that can feel miserable to lane against, KENNEN has settled in nicely with the new items. The new Rocket Belt fits him perfectly, since it functions basically the same way as Proto Belt, but with the added burst of movement speed helping to easily land fat ultimates, even when Flash isn't available. KENNEN's early laning may be strong enough to consider him a bully, but his win rate is actually at its lowest in the earlier stages of the game. This is because as the game goes on, KENNEN starts to lose the 1v1 in side lanes against almost all top laners, as they can pick up items and force all-ins. But as the game goes on, both teams start to group for the majority of the time around towers, dragons, and Baron. KENNEN then becomes much more successful. So with his one weakness being his mid-game side laning, he needs something to survive that stage of the game. This could be accomplished with tankier stats, but that's a boring approach. What if instead, Riot made it so that KENNEN got his remaining E's duration back if he cancels it early? That way he can use it to kite enemies, but still turn and deal damage, and not use it only to run away. The last champion we'll be looking at is Zyra, and for the sake of this, I'll be talking about her potential as a mid laner. Riot has already shown that they are willing to buff a champion's viability in another role, like they did with Pantheon. And I think with just a nudge in the right direction, Zyra could be an insanely powerful control mage. I don't think Zyra actually needs some huge changes to make this happen either, Something lazy like more base damages or lower cooldowns would just make her more oppressive as a support. One option is to give her higher AP ratios, or do a small rework on her plants, causing her AP to make them tankier, like Ivern with Daisy. Her W already recharges faster when she's the one getting minion kills, so maybe another option that encourages solo play would be for her passive cooldown to go down twice as fast when there's no allies nearby. As a support, Zyra's super well-rounded as a mage, providing poke, peel, and huge teamfight DPS. So on a mid laner's budget, she could become a seriously strong carry. Now that we've covered some champions that are borderline OP, let's take a look at some items that we think fall into the same category. We'll be leading this section with Kraken Slayer. The item shop's description may be that Kraken Slayer is an anti-tank item due to it dealing true damage. But since it does flat damage, not damage based on HP, it does pretty solid against squishier enemies too. The item isn't necessarily weak right now, but it isn't the go-to option either. In fact, many players even prefer to build Gale Force for the burst of damage it provides. So a change I think that would be great to see is Kraken Slayer's passive becoming on hit instead of on attack. This would mean that Ginsu's Phantom Hit would apply Kraken Slayer's passive. Going into the preseason, Ginsu's kept its Phantom Hit passive, but the rest of it was converted into a crit item. Riot seemed to be pushing it as a way to open up alternative build paths on AD carries, but that hasn't really panned out, and the item is only really built on Kog, Yi, and Vayne like before. But swapping Kraken Slayer to an on-hit item would fix that, opening up build paths for ADCs and melee carries to deal with teams stacked with multiple tanks, something that they really struggle to do at the moment. Gargoyle Stoneplate was a staple item for supports, serving as the sole frontliner last season, but Riot has really attempted to push it more towards being a tank item now with its steeper price and its passive relying on stats from other items to make you tankier. But one thing that doesn't really make too much sense is the shield active. The shield decays in just 2.5 seconds, and with all your resistances backing it up, it's mostly going to waste, dissipating due to its duration more often than actually being broken by the enemy team. Such a short burst of tankiness doesn't make too much sense on a champion that should be absorbing most of the damage coming from the enemy team for the duration of an entire team fight. That's why the item is actually more successful as a late game purchase on some bruisers and juggernauts, who can actually get full value out of the active. If the shield duration was increased just a bit to about 4 or 5 seconds and no longer decayed, then we'd have a truly powerful late game option for tanks that would make them much harder to bring down. Now that the meta is balancing out a bit, ADCs are finally in a good place. Well, some of them are in a good place anyway. Of the ADCs not doing too great, there's an interesting common denominator between a few of them: Essence Reaver. Xayah and Sivir are two of the worst ADCs in the game by a huge margin, and both of them relied on this as part of their core build. Miss Fortune also relied on the item, but she's found success by going a different route, opting for Manamune and Lethality as her core items early. So what's wrong with the new Essence Reaver? Well, the damage has been lowered and the mana restore has been tied to the Spellblade passive. Even though the champions that built Essence Reaver are considered the caster ADCs, they still auto-attack a ton, and got much more mana out of the old passive than the new one. The reason Sivir and Xayah seem so unplayable is because they're constantly out of mana. Swapping the Sheen out for a dagger or two and reverting the passive back would be a welcome change, and would make Essence Reaver an incredibly strong choice for the champions that need it. And that wraps up our 10 things that are almost OP. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to sub so you never miss out on other great content like this. Remember to let us know what rare picks you never see lose in the comments below. And one last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description box below, where you can enter our giveaway or just hang out and be a part of our community. I can't wait to see you guys back for the next video. But until then, good luck on the Rift, stay safe, and wash those hands. Bye.